Well, I'm Ken Strong. Bob Miller and I are co-chairs of Marine Conservation League's Climate Action Working Group. Welcome everybody this morning. Marine Conservation League's message or vision is to preserve, protect, and enhance the natural assets of Marin in a changing environment. Marine Conservation League has 3 committees. This is the Climate Action Working Group, which is the changing environment part of that, although we are finding the changing environment is affecting all of our work. The other 2 committees, for those who are not familiar with them, are a Parks and Open Space Committee and a Land Use, Transportation, and Water and Housing Committee. The meeting here today has, distraction on the Zoom thing. The meeting today has 2 real parts. The first part of the meeting, we have with us today the sustainability coordinators, Grace Ledwith from Mill Valley and Tiburon, Bridget Whippler from Fairfax and San Anselmo, and Phoebe Goulden from Corte Madera, who are going to talk to us about what their jobs are, what they're doing, and what we can do to help them do their jobs better. And so that's going to take up roughly the first hour of the meeting. The second hour of the meeting is going to focus on actions that we can all be taking in 2025 and beyond, given sort of the new reality in this country as far as pursuing our climate goals. So we're going to have that'll be the second hour as a discussion on that topic. So with that, meeting logistics, we'll get when it comes time to ask questions, go ahead and raise your hand and we will call on you. Just fairly quickly, for those of on Zoom who can't see, we have in the room, in addition to myself and Bob Miller, Bill Carney, Bell Cole, Fabrice Florin, Jody Timms, Bruce Ackerman, Bridget, Grace, and Phoebe. With that, we'll get started with the meeting. Again, logistics, speak into the owl when you're talking here in the room. So first of all, I thought we'd start by each of you just briefly introducing yourself and providing a brief background on who you are and just a little bit about what your job is. Bridget, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, nice to meet everybody. I have some familiar faces in the room from the Climate Action Committee in Fairfax, so it's nice to also meet some new folks. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator, or officially the Climate Action Coordinator for the towns of San Anselmo and Fairfax. And I started this position in October. Before that, I was working on environmental sustainability at the city of Redmond, right out of Seattle, which was after I got that position after I studied urban planning and community engagement at the University of Washington. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
All
right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us. Really excited to be here and have this conversation with you all. My name is Phoebe Goulden. I'm the Climate Action and Adaptation Coordinator for the town of Corte Madera. I'm local to the Bay Area, grew up in Petaluma and studied environmental sciences at UC Berkeley, and then got into local public policy environmental work after graduating with a Civic Spark Fellowship with the city of Sebastopol in Sonoma County, where I was developing their climate action framework. Been with the town since December of 2022. I'm the first person to hold this climate action adaptation coordinator role for the town, which is really unique and exciting to be able to sort of shape the role in that way. And it's a really broad and varied role. I work on everything from public EV charging to green building codes, waste sorting in town facilities, fleet electrification, pretty much anything that's relates to climate and sustainability is likely to come across my desk. And then I also staff our Climate Action Committee and support a lot of their community engagement, outreach efforts. And my role also includes an adaptation component. So Corte Madera, pretty much all of the town is either in the floodplain or in the WUI, the wildland urban interface. So the climate change threats there are really real. So I work on that, a lot of community engagement, particularly with our shoreline neighborhoods. So happy to be here.
Great. And Grace, and actually, before the way we're going to conduct the meeting is we're going to be asking each of them different questions, Bill Carney and I, and we'll start with one question, then a different person with another question to try and make this interactive. Sorry about the interruption.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I'm Grace Ledwith. I am the Joint Climate Action Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Mill Valley and the town of Tiburon. Very similar to Phoebe and Bridget's roles, very much a generalist in a lot of different subjects. So working either on electric vehicles, electrification, waste management, employee sustainability practices. Like Phoebe said, anything related to climate or sustainability will come to our desk. A little bit about me. I have a bachelor's of science in environmental economics and policy from UC Berkeley. Prior to this role, I worked, excuse me, I worked in a couple different environmental programming roles for different agencies, including the East Bay Regional Park District, a community farm, and actually the University of California. And in those roles, I did a lot of conservation work. So whether that was watershed management, environmental education, or coordinating between different jurisdictions. I really am passionate about community engagement and how that affects policy and climate. And I joined, when did I start this role? August 2023. So it's been like a year and a half-ish. So it's really, I'm really happy to be here with my colleagues. And I'm also the current chair of the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership, which the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership.
You might explain that.
We'll circle back to that, I know, but yeah, MCEP is what it's called.
Great. Bill?
Yeah, well, let's jump into some substance. I'm really interested in what your priorities are, and perhaps a little bit on how you go about setting those priorities, which I'm sure is a collaborative effort. But yeah, I would like to touch on the primary priorities, and in that, I think I'm hoping will emerge what are the powers of local government when it comes to this global issue.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, I believe that Phoebe wanted to start that. I'm hopeful that Grace and Bridget will join in as well.
Yeah, happy to kick that off. And just to give a little background, starting with how we set our priorities in Corte Madera. When I started with the town, I started an annual climate action planning process, which we do in partnership with our climate action committee. And basically we're starting out looking at our climate action plan and our latest greenhouse gas inventory and seeing what are the biggest categories of emissions there and what can we do to impact those emissions, and what can we accomplish in this year. So we're picking those priority actions, not only from the climate action plan, but also from countywide planning efforts that have been completed more recently, like the building electrification roadmap, the EV acceleration strategy. Those provide, I think of them as sort of supplements to our climate action plans, because they provide some more specific actions, more updated actions, specifically related to those two main emission categories. So we're picking those actions from the CAP, from the countywide plans, and then we're incorporating those into our overall staff work plan, which is then reviewed by council and approved for the year. And that's a public process. Anyone's welcome to join those climate action committee or town council meetings and provide feedback and help shape what the priorities are for the next year. So for 2025, some of the top work plan categories that I have are public EV charging stations, fleet electrification plan, and adopting new green building codes for the 2025 code cycle, which is already underway. So those are addressing sort of those main emission categories of transportation and natural gas use in buildings. But then there's also other strategies on there, like developing an environmentally preferable purchasing policy and updating our recommended street tree list. And those are addressing some sort of other parts of our climate action plan. And then on the adaptation side, the main item that's on my work plan for this year is related to shoreline flood protection. And that's coming out of a community engagement effort that we spent a lot of time on last year, talking to our shoreline communities about flood risk and what can be done to protect those neighborhoods. And the priority that came out of that engagement work is looking at how we can raise and fortify an existing flood berm that's protecting our Marina Village neighborhood. So we've applied for and been selected for a FEMA grant that we're hoping comes through to continue that work, but even if it doesn't, that's the priority, and we'll be starting to move that effort forward.
Question? Okay,
You want to say questions?
or you want to wait?
If you have a
It's just. a
clarifying
kind of,
question, sorry.
process question with respect to, your committee that you work for. Are these priorities established by them and then you carry them out, or do you have some involvement in the establishment of the priorities?
Yeah, so typically staff will prepare a draft climate action work plan for the year, and then we'll present it to our climate action committee and ask if there's any feedback or anything they'd like to change or modify. And then once we have the final work plan with their input, then we take it to town council and they have the final sort of approval on what staff will work on for the year. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, and that was a great, summary of what you're involved in over there, looking toward this year. I wonder if you two guys have anything
I
to
can-
add from your perspective.
Yeah, excuse me, I have a frog in my throat. I can chime in. So, and I'm just looking to kind of circle back into the Marine Climate Energy Partnership. Phoebe mentioned inventories and, our climate action plan. So those were developed within the community emissions inventories. We try to get them done each year, and that's done through the Marine Climate Energy Partnership. So all of the community greenhouse gas emission inventories that we use to kind of prioritize our work is done through the Energy Partnership. And understandably, a lot of our priorities are very similar because we have similar climate action plans, which is intentional, right? The work is not changing really between jurisdiction to jurisdiction. The priorities of climate are very well known. And as Phoebe said, that's typically transportation and buildings. And then using our emission inventories, we can kind of gauge what's changing and what's not. For example, energy has actually been going down quite a bit in terms of emissions, just because energy is getting more efficient. So maybe that's not something that we have to put a ton of, energy into. I didn't mean that as a joke. But we can maybe focus on things that require a little bit more hands-on work to push that needle more. So transportation, electric vehicles are a really big thing. So my priority list, and probably Bridget's priority list, I don't want to speak on behalf of her, are very similar, right? So, and we also have communication between us as sustainability staff of what are we thinking of priorities? It's a very open conversation, right? And whether that's with community members or with council or with each other, we want the work to be transparent. And so in order to do that, we have to really look at the numbers and have conversations with the interested community members, our council, each other. So I would say my priorities are copy and pasted from Phoebe.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't want to be redundant, and a lot of my work plan reflects Phoebe and Grace's, whether that's on building, transportation, or waste. So I'll talk a little bit about how I end up going about it day to day and how I collaborate with internal staff. I know that some of the questions we talk about, we have a talk about interacting with other staff and decision makers. So I'll just give a trailer to that. But because and Grace and I are in a similar position where we work part-time for 2 towns, 20 hours a week can go by really quickly when we're trying to find grants and work on internal work plans or work within or work also delegating with climate action commissions. It takes up a lot of time, and so how I've tried to be efficient is really tap into where the momentum is in it within other departments. Especially because I'm not going to be the one installing the HVAC systems in municipal buildings, nor implementing permitting processes at the front counter when folks are going into the permit desk. So I need to make sure that they really are my kind of peers at the towns really understand why they're doing it and how to implement the climate action plan on their kind of standards. And so it's a lot of relationship building. It's a lot of creating understanding and roles and responsibilities. Where do I tap in? Where do they tap in? And yeah, I won't get too into it because I know we're all going to answer that question. But all of these kind of questions bleed into each other. So, but just kind of highlighting the fact that our work is really, really supported by the rest of the town. And it can't be done only by ourselves. That's why we're kind of coordinators.
Right. Just would like to take a little deeper dive into the two primary things that were mentioned in terms of greenhouse gas, which are transportation and building electrification. And I'm kind of struck by the EV thing being an emphasis, I believe, and that in some ways is perhaps one of the hardest things to influence from a governmental and particularly a local governmental standpoint versus, say, building electrification, which is more traditionally part of local government. So I wonder how you about tackling that very difficult area of EVs.
I don't know if you want to, and I'm happy to answer that question.
Sure.
It's difficult, as you said, and our focus as government, right? We want to support community and have community infrastructure. So the main push would be we need more public electric vehicle charging stations for our folks that already own an EV or are thinking about an EV, but maybe are on the fence because there's not enough infrastructure for their needs. Specifically, the biggest concern that I have with electric vehicle infrastructure is equity. It's a huge equity issue, right? Where we put chargers, are we pushing them where they don't need to be pushed? Are we putting them in places where they're actually going to be utilized? And then we have the kind of the back end issues of a government agency being in a fueling industry, so to say, is kind of vague and kind of odd, right? We don't, the cities don't own gas pumps. So we would be, us owning public charging stations, it's a whole new endeavor. And so we're trying to explore ways with TAM and other vendors on how can we delegate that responsibility to someone who's maybe more fit, where we can kind of take the back seat and they can operate these chargers and make sure that they're up and running for the public. And when we would give them essentially layout, land, etc. But it's difficult, right? They're also can be very expensive depending on the location. A lot of electrical work is maybe required, a panel upgrade in a certain area, undergrounding for wire. The cost can add up a lot. And unfortunately, there's funding opportunities that we were looking at as a regional approach or even just a single jurisdictional approach that might not be available anymore just due to recent changes in the federal and state legislation. So it is very complicated, but something that we're really also trying to focus on too is there's been a lot of push in the last few years. I'm sure you have noticed for EVs, a lot of incentives, a lot of programs, which is great. We want people to use EVs, but we also want people to use other forms of transit, whether that's micromobility or public transit or walking. So we're trying not to put all of our eggs into the EV basket, so to say. So I think also a way we're tackling that issue is diversifying where we're looking in terms of the transportation issue being, how do we just get people out of single occupancy vehicles? How do we make it so that there's multimodal transit available? I think, I also, with the layout of the two city towns I work for, it's a little funky. Mill Valley has a big hillside. Tiburon is really one way in, one way out kind of place. So that sort of planning can be really challenging, but it's something that our residents also really want and advocate for, not only on the climate level, but just in a general sense. They want other opportunities. And so, yeah, I know that's a long-winded answer, but
Something to interject in there. So your climate action plans, and I didn't mean to keep cut either of the two of you off if you wanted to follow up on what Grace had to say, but one thing that I think about is the climate action plans address both what the towns should be doing with their own resources and equipment and buildings, et cetera, as well as encouraging the residents of the town. And so that was, your answer was just now was when you're talking about transportation was focused on sound like more the public.
right.
And so I'm kind of wondering how you work within your towns where you may have, you're trying to electrify vehicles, but they may be vehicles that only get replaced once every 20 years or, you know, with some of the pickup trucks and some of those other. So
One of y'all want to answer that question?
Yeah, well, we now have state legislation that's requiring us to think about those fleet purchases and when they can be electrified. Which is something that we were already doing before the legislation was in place, but you mentioned pickup trucks and now this legislation is specifically on medium and heavy duty vehicles, which is more of a public works fleet. So that's the CARB Advanced Clean Fleet regulation that 50% of town vehicle purchases be electric. And then it goes to 100% at some point.
2027.
Yeah. So we're looking at that every time a vehicle comes up for replacement. We need to consider how many purchases we're going to be making in total that year, which ones can be electric, because some of the vehicles, there's not a electric substitute that's available right now that can perform at the same way. And that's part of what I mentioned, the fleet electrification plan is on my work plan for this year. That's part of what that process will help with. And I believe all of them are in towns, or at least most of them applied for technical assistance from MTC, which is a regional body, to help us develop those plans and really look at what our fleet is and plan for how that can be electrified over time, as well as the infrastructure, having the charging infrastructure to support those vehicles going electric. And I just wanted to add one comment to Grace's response earlier about how the cities and towns can promote EVs. The building codes not only address electrification, but can also address charging infrastructure. So that's something that many jurisdictions have already adopted and that we'll be looking at readopting in the next code cycle, is requiring in new construction, but also in certain renovations, the installation of charging infrastructure, or at least readiness to have a charger installed in the future. And that enables more people to get EVs. And we're also, our climate action committee this year is going to be focusing on outreach to multifamily properties, because we know that's an area that is typically underserved by charging infrastructure, and encouraging landowners to take advantage of the incentives that do exist from MCE and others to help install infrastructure in those buildings.
And that's a great segue to that second area of building electrification. And as you say, there's this, regulation is the primary tool in the box that you've got keying off of the state building code. So you're able to adopt that to the extent of, relative ambition that each town has for adopting those codes and reach codes. So that's, I think, also part of the toolbox that you've got. We've got a bunch of other things to talk about, but I just want to kind of leave with two questions that maybe you can weave in as we go on. And that's, a relatively new thing that is on the table is sequestration. And how do you draw down, greenhouse gases that are already in the atmosphere? And that's something that people are just beginning to think about, I think. So I'd be curious about thoughts about that. And secondly, and lastly for me anyway, is this sort of balance. I'd be interested in your opinions about the balance of kind of addressing the problem by reducing greenhouse gases and then addressing the impacts that are already upon us. And you've mentioned a couple of them. But, you know, do you find yourself being pulled more and more to addressing the impacts, which is that's in everybody's face, versus actually addressing how do you reduce the greenhouse gases? So those are big questions. I don't know, Ken, but
Well, if anybody wants to jump in on any one of those before we lose track of them, that's fine.
Kind of question, I can at least try and get that second one. integrated.
Go ahead. As far as what your role is as sustainability coordinator and framing and urging actions?
Yeah,
Yeah, so
I can jump from there. And I should have prefaced this earlier, and I apologize that I did not. A big distinction between my role and Bridget and Phoebe's role is I don't have climate action commissions in the cities that I work for. That was a decision by council pre me joining this role. And so instead we try to really engage community public. I know there was a few folks on the call today that I've talked with a bit. So our local groups that we have, but in terms of role, like, and so that makes my maybe answer a little different to this question, right? The way I frame and urge actions is going to be different because I don't have a commission to work with. So for us, framing it's, and I don't want to be redundant from that priorities question, right? Framing actions, right? When we're thinking about what should we do next, very similar to priorities, right? We look at our climate action plan and we look at the most recent data we have for our inventory, our emissions inventory. And we bounce off the two, say, okay, what's feasible, what's achievable, and what makes the most sense? What will have the biggest impact, most bang for the buck? We don't want to work on a project tirelessly and really push for it, only for the action to not have a huge impact. We want them to have a bigger impact. And so that's something that we also talk about as a staff. And urging actions is challenging. And I think that's where we really get into the trying to negate and then trying to manage the impact that's already happened. Because when we're working with community, you're doing public engagement and outreach, which for me is the biggest tool, right? We talking about policy as a means to push actions forward, and policy is great, but for me personally, I try to not go the policy route if possible. It can, like I mentioned earlier, it can cause some equity issues in terms of implementation. It can cause maybe additional confusion for residents who aren't this is their first time hearing about a certain topic, and now that there's a law and ordinance and that they have to follow, and it might actually cost them money, especially when we're talking about like buildings or transportation and vehicles. So, and that's going to happen with the REIT code, right? We're going to instill a code that changes how we do things, and that might have some sort of impact on residents. So we're trying to get ahead of that by doing outreach. So for me, that's the biggest thing for urging actions is what are tangible resources that we can give our residents, say, here, this is something that will help you do this. I know, like, if you really have interest in doing this thing, but it's been an issue, whether it's financially or you don't have the technical knowledge to understand how it works, here is a webinar on how to understand it, especially with heat pumps, right? Heat pumps are very kind of new and are going to be kind of a requirement going forward. EVs are still kind of a wishy-washy subject for some people. They also are expensive. So if people want to make the switch to an EV, here's a rebate you can use. Here's another informational session you can use. Here's someone you can talk to. Here's a tool you can do an energy assessment on your home and figure out what the issues are. So it's not a one size fits all solution. So framing and urging actions, we look at our priority list, we see what's coming down the line, right? We think about buildings, transportation, and then kind of the back end. Okay, 6 months from now, how is this going to impact our residents? Let's close the gap while we're ahead. And especially when we're thinking about kind of lessening the impact that's already happened. Because that's when people think of climate change, they probably think of things that have already been happening to them, whether that's related to sea level rise, whether that's related to increased costs with energy or whatnot, with fire, right, with natural disasters. That's what we're really trying to focus on. And that, again, like Bridget was kind of hinting at, that takes a lot of interdepartmental work as well, right? When we're talking about natural disasters, that involves our public safety teams. When we're talking about buildings, that involves our building and planning team. So having also that closing the gap, educating our residents, but also educating our staff and making sure that they're aware that, hey, this is going to be something that's going to continue to come up. And we need to be equipped to handle it when our residents come and ask questions or need assistance. So making sure that we're the best we can be as well. Again, I know that's a long-winded answer, but I don't know if you guys have anything to add. I probably missed some stuff.
No, I think you got it perfectly right. That's where we're using the tools of the climate action plans and the greenhouse gas inventories to focus our work and really bring climate into the conversation across the town.
One of the issues that I used to hear, still hear repeatedly, was the struggle with the public works or the building code department, you know, the you're gonna impose a new requirement on us. For example, we were talking last year about some sort of a home inspection requirement at time of listing or something like that. And what we kept hearing was the challenge that the building departments and the folks over the counter, they just didn't have any more bandwidth to deal with those sort of things. You getting that kind of pushback, and how does that work?
Yeah, I can touch on that. So most, pretty much the first month that I started, I got feedback when I was introducing myself from the Public Works and Building Department. Like, it's very nice to meet you. Don't give me any more work. And so kind of right from the get-go, I knew that I was going to have to frame everything that I was doing within their work plans that have already been set until the next budget cycle. And so I know that I can be a part of that conversation when the annual planning comes or the CIP planning happens. So like I kind of can pick my battles until that priority setting comes, where I can really be a part of that conversation and say, these are the things that we really need to be prioritizing, so that everything is on one paper that they also can approve of, rather than I'm jumping in right now. They're halfway through the year and they are kind of stretched thin. And so how I usually go about it is say, okay, if your scopes are limited by funding, well, like, let me find you funding. And so to address some of the extra, like, let's get a water heater for that building because we didn't before because they're expensive. And so I can convince the building staff to let me help them by going and grabbing grants for them that they don't have time to look for or apply for, to expand that scope potentially, or where the funding doesn't impact their bandwidth.
Yeah, I would say it's really important to, and that this is our role, right, is to get to know all the departments and understand their workload, and their processes, and work with them to sort of build the climate efforts and solutions into their work, because it's all a really collaborative effort.
And that's how you interact with staff for the most part, as far as this push and pull on the budget side of things. Is that where the focus is, or?
I don't know if I would describe it so much of a push and a pull. But yeah, I think the annual work planning process and the budgeting process, these kind of advanced planning efforts that we do, are really helpful in setting the priorities and making sure everyone's on the same page in terms of what needs to get done this year and what council has directed us to do this year. And yeah, it's called a coordinator role for a reason. There's very few projects that I work on by myself. As Grace mentioned, the building codes, obviously we're working with the building department, shoreline adaptation work, it's public works, but also community development department, because it's planning for the whole town. So, and it really depends on what that coordination looks like, whether it's a interdepartmental team that's getting together and meeting throughout the course of a project, or if it's just a more sort of ad hoc collaboration. we all work for pretty small towns, so there aren't that many staff to get to know. And so it's pretty easy to just, you know, if you're in the office, go down the hall and chat with someone or send a Teams message. So there's that kind of ad hoc.
Do you find that, these other, agencies and new colleagues that you meet, how are they on climate change? Do they know much about it? Do they give it a high priority? Do they need education? I mean, where does that stand?
I can answer that. Yeah, it's all a conversation, right? With the staff that we work with. Some of the folks, like, these are fairly new positions, right? Like, within last 2.5 years, we've been here. Phoebe's the most senior out of the three of us. And so beforehand, that work was still happening, but that maybe was delegated, apologies, to a different staff member. So especially like within, for me, that was in the planning department. So some, like, our planning department folks are very well versed because they had a big part in creating our climate action plan. And a lot of other staff too are part of creating the climate action plan. So they are aware, but then the thing is, as we all know, it's not rigid. It changes all the time. New things come up all the time. And that's why we kind of have to be a generalist, because as things change, we need to pick that up and learn it so we can inform other people.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say there's any, at least for me, there's no pushback of, I don't want to do this. It's really just an educational, informational issue. It's like drinking out of a fire hose. If you don't be, precise is the only word I can think of right now, of how you communicate information, it can seem really overwhelming. And so having that conversation of, hey, these are the priorities. How can we work together on this? What's feasible for you? How can I help? This isn't me telling you to do these things. It's me, I want to assist you in this. I can't, yeah, I'm not going to work the permitting counter and do permits. I'm not in the public works department. I can't do engineering work, but I have the information and the knowledge that can help you, and I can help find funding. I can give you resources to look at, and we can have this conversation because council has said that this is a priority, so we need to work on it together. And it's more of that conversation. I wouldn't say that anyone's ill-adept at these topics, but it's a lot of technical stuff. It's a lot of information. So it's kind of our job to be the big filter for that, and then communicate that directly to the appropriate parties.
So I want to return to a question that Ken mentioned right at the very beginning, which is how can we help, we being the public, and is that, public within your own towns or groups like this that are, countywide? How can individual citizens really support and contribute to and help in your really important work?
Yeah, I'm lucky because I get to work with two really participatory and informed climate action committees. And so I get a lot of face time with the community, at least volunteers who are really extra knowledgeable about climate action. And so what has been really helpful is their participation. They show up to these climate action committees. They're a real great sounding board, and also while I'm a liaison to the government, they're almost a liaison to the community about what does the community need to understand these topics. I mean, Grace was just talking about how it's a lot of information for staff to understand it. It's a lot of information for homeowners, renters, community members. We do this full time and it's still confusing at times, and so for folks to spend just a little bit of their free time to try and understand it, I'm extremely impressed with you all for coming and doing this and in your free time and really understanding everything. And so what's really helpful is when there are outreach strategies or outreach events to really participate in those, because us as government liaisons want to know what we don't know about how to serve the public. And because that's our role, that's kind of our why. And so when there's that ask, there's that need to receive. And so a lot of participation, a lot of question or ask questions. I don't get that many emails from the public But yeah, like I said before, kind of, we don't know what we don't know from like what the public needs sometimes, so that's why we do outreach strategies to figure that out. But sometimes that doesn't happen, every month, all the time, and so. Yeah,
Yeah,
any additions?
Totally agree. Participating and getting involved, and you guys are
Mhm.
already doing this, is amazing. And the other thing I think is really important that you all can do is talking to your neighbors and your
Mhm.
friends and telling them what you're doing, because as much as we try to do that outreach and to be a trusted source of information, it's just different when it comes
Mhm.
from someone that you talk to every day. And so when we did our climate action committee did a heat pump webinar last year, we had homeowners come who had already installed heat pump water heaters and talk about their experience. And so if you've done something for the climate, tell people about it, because I think that really helps to get people more involved, and to understand that people that they know and care about are doing these things, and here's how they can do them too.
We have sort of one more question for you, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So what are the main challenges you face, and what would you do if there was more funding available for the sort of activities you do? Maybe not for the climate coordinator position, but maybe for your the departments you work with.
Or incentive.
Yeah.
I've been leading a lot of questions, if someone wants to jump in first.
Well, I can start with the obvious one, which is the challenges we're facing with the federal environment right now, and the with threat of withdrawal of funding, in some cases actual withdrawal of funding, and just general confusion in that area. We know that the incentives, particularly for heat pump technology and EVs, have been really important, because these top technologies are more expensive than their fossil fuel equivalents. So I think that's really concerning. And if we had more funding, I think it would be great to dedicate that, not necessarily to our individual towns, at least for Corte Madera, but for these countywide efforts, like the public EV charging stations and Electrify Marin, which already has a great rebate program. If you look at these countywide documents, like the EV acceleration strategy and the countywide building electrification roadmap, a lot of things we can implement in our own towns, but a lot of things are a collaborative countywide effort, and that's how they're going to be most effective, and that's how they need to happen. So I would love to have, if we had more funding, for it to go towards those more countywide efforts, especially as we see these changes in rebates. Even on the state level, some of the Tech Clean California rebates, they come out and then they're gone in a couple months. So having the certainty in the rebates, I think, would be really helpful in getting more people to adopt technologies.
And we won't tell anybody in Corte Madera that you want the money to go countywide.
Okay, so we're going to shift to Q&A, and if you put your question in the chat, it will make it easier to make sure it gets answered. But but you can also, of course, raise your hand. I'm going to start with a question Jim Burrows asked, and that was that what kind of metrics, if any, are or will be used to evaluate the effectiveness of the town's climate action programs?
I mean, that's a great question. And I think a lot of it does, I would say not, unfortunately, it ties back to that emission inventories that we do. So since it's done annually, we can actually track what's being reduced each year and what's maybe not being reduced. If we can see the data of the metric tons of carbon being reduced or not reduced each year. So it's kind of like a big spreadsheet of, hey, this is the transportation sector, it's going up and down each year. And then we can kind of look back on a work plan and think, why did that change happen in like 2010 to 2011? What did we do that made it decrease that much? Or was there something at a higher level that kind of influenced us to make that change? So that's how we would measure it. As I think most of you know, our climate action plans are scheduled out to 2030. So by the time 2030 hits, we're going to do a really hard evaluation of our main goal, right? For us, I have 2 climate action plans, but it's like around the 47-50% mark below 1990 levels. So Did we hit that mark or not? That's like the biggest marker of them all. We hit 2030. Did we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions to the amount that we said we would? If we did, amazing. You know, we can track how we did that based on our work plan, based on the inventories. If we didn't, same thing. We can see what went wrong. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that briefly, our climate action committee is right now developing some additional metrics that are a little bit more tangible than the greenhouse gas emissions. So they're looking at tracking heat pump water heaters installed, heat pump space heaters installed, percent of new car purchases that are EVs, and trying to find some other numbers that we can look at hopefully on an annual basis to track progress.
How are we doing with the 2030 goal? Think you'll get there?
Fingers crossed. It looks good. But you know, what we're like halfway-ish through, aren't we? And I think actually a few of us are looking at, we have like updated our climate action plan relatively soon. Just to make sure that we are on top of it. But yeah, I totally missed that too, Phoebe. You're so right. Yeah, looking at numbers of, especially when we're talking about the building green code stuff, when we have that, the permit numbers, we can really see who's doing it, who's not. And is it actually happening?
Especially kind of looping in that conversation of carbon sequestration, that can be hard to set metrics too of, well, we used, you know, X tons of mulch in our composter, distributed it in our city, but you know, there are those equations that can tell you how much carbon that can sequester, but it's hard to assign numbers and metrics to that. But we're like, yeah, if you want to step back and say, well, let's apply this amount of mulch, because we know that that's doing something, because the drawing carbon out of the atmosphere is also half the battle.
Well,
John,
can I add one more thing?
Yeah,
Actually, I want to tie in also back to what the community can do in this question.
Mm-hmm.
A big thing that we can't measure that you as community members really do is the consumption-based emissions.
Mm-hmm.
Our emissions inventories don't cover purchases that you make or choices that you make in your daily life. So doing your due diligence on making environmentally friendly choices and communicating that as a kind of a domino effect to people around you is huge. We have no idea what that number is for our communities. So even if we hit our climate action goal, there might be a huge chunk of emissions still hanging because of the consumption based for stuff.
How would you measure that?
There's some data from, I think, 2014
Yeah.
that a group out of UC Berkeley did. And I'm not sure the exact methods they use, but it's so, you know, so difficult to track, and that's why we don't track it, because it would be every single purchase that everyone makes, every meal you ate, every flight you took. Yeah, right.
I'm seeing a hand raised from Suzanne. Susanna?
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for this great presentation, and you are also knowledgeable. I'm so impressed. And San and Selma and Fairfax are so lucky to have Bridget. She's just made herself so available, and it's just fantastic. You know, I just have a question and a comment. I admire the focus on equity, but you know, Mill Valley and Tiburon are some of the richest towns in the richest county. And if we can't do it, you know, who can? I understand that, and it's admirable, but the reality is this is a very, very wealthy county. And I know that, you know, the cost for a gas furnace is the same as the cost for, you know, the cost for a heat pump is the same as the cost for a gas heater and an air conditioning, if you have adequate panel space. But my main question is, you know, and just fine. And one more thing is that you know, because the rebates are disappearing, the cost is going to go down, because actually the contractors are charging more because of these rebates. But also my main question is, you know, how do we get more public participation in our educational events? Because we have put them on, and you know, we've advertised a lot, and the only people that have come are, you know, people that you know, our chair of the commission brought with him from his neighborhood. So how can you help us get more people to come to our educational events?
Yeah, something with outreach is that it's not gonna be a one size fits all event. I think with outreach and participation, there has to be a lot of, or a few different methods to reach different groups. Not everyone's going to be free in the evening for a workshop. Not everyone's gonna be free at 10 o'clock in the morning for a conversation like this. And so Sue, I love that question. I love thinking about how to get more people involved, and I think it's, you know, there's love languages and there's participation languages, because, you know, we can put out communication in different ways. There's videos, there's surveys, but also folks want to give feedback in different ways or want to participate in different ways, whether that is, you know, responding to those surveys or going to different events. So it's really kind of casting your net as much as possible in the means that you can, to, yeah, reach the audiences that you want to and need to.
John Duvall asked a question, and that was that, how, I'm going to change it a little bit, but how do you or can you engage with local educational and business entities to contribute to your work?
I think that kind of ties back into that discussion we had. It really is kind of, again, that infinite funding question, for me, it would be going towards outreach education. Meeting people where they are. Me putting out an email blast to everyone I have on a listserv, it definitely does some engagement, but you know, you're gonna get the same people. If there's someone who's interested in a certain thing, or if there's a business that's interested in a certain thing, you'll get them. That won't be the problem. The problem's gonna be everyone else. And so really having that conversation of, this is not a thing where I'm trying to tell you to do something. We see that a lot, especially with the waste stuff in businesses. We have our reusable foodware ordinances. We have SB 1383, which is a composting law. So when I talk to business about that, and I'm like, you know, government employee talking about a law, it's like, whoa, no. So having that conversation of, this is an educational thing. I want to work with you to make this happen. And also, I want you to be a beacon for our community. I want you to represent what our community values, which are climate, you know, are relatively, a majority of our community has a big focus and passion for climate action and sustainability. So you can actually kind of benefit from that as well. You can show that you are a representator, for lack of a better word, of these values. But it's hard. It's a never-ending question that we think about all the time. We think about it on a regional level, we think about it at a local level. Something that's been really helpful, and apologize, I'm talking fast because I know we're short on time, is partnering with our local agencies. So Zero Waste Marin, Transportation Authority of Marin, Zero Waste, I said Zero Waste Marin, Plastic Free Marin, our other advocate groups such as you all, having them also be that voice where it's not coming from the city, the town, the government, it's coming from agencies, it's coming from people that are like you. That's a bit more impactful, because there's certain, you know, we have power in some areas and we have less power in some others, and the other where we really struggle is engagement and community focus.
Just to quickly add on to that, onto the school question, one way that Fort Madera has been engaging with youth and the school population is through, we have a youth member on our climate action committee, and we also have a student ambassador program that our climate action committee runs. And so that's helping to engage youth, specifically our environmental action clubs at local high schools. And that's been a way that we've been having a conversation with the youth and school communities as well.
So I'm seeing another question or two up on the screen. Al, you had a question. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, just wanted to start by saying, you know, I've had the pleasure of working closely with Grace over time, and we are very fortunate to have her as our community partner in city government. So thank you for everything you do. I guess that this is related to the thread you were just on, which is but focused a little more on compliance and enforcement, where, you know, the the things we're asking community members to do are not technically optional. So, whether it's watching a failure to comply with composting rules, or businesses not providing waste stream management to allow their customers to sort waste in effective ways. How can we mobilize members of this community to help with that enforcement? What are the limits to enforcement and compliance so that we can manage our expectations? This seems to be an ongoing challenge that's not just limited to waste, but also, some of the leaf blower stuff and other contexts where, compliance is aspirational at this point.
Jump in if you don't want to.
Well, I can just say on the waste sorting side, that's really on Zero Waste Marin, and they're the agency that's responsible for enforcing, especially SB 1383. The cities and towns have delegated enforcement responsibility to them. And then on the other side, it is a challenge. There's a lot of ordinances and regulations that cities have to enforce. So it's a balance, and as Grace said, it's an education component as well.
Yeah, it's a struggle because the compliance and enforcement for these ordinances is not done within the city. Our goal is educational. If we're looking to penalize or fine someone, that's through the county, that's through the state. So that's when it gets a little funky. So if there's an ongoing compliance issue with someone we've tried to work with, there's only so much we can do because we can't send our folks to go out there to find them. It's a different agency. And then with like we're talking about leaf blowers, when I think about equity too, I'm not only thinking about like the residents who are like, I live in Mill Valley, I live in Tiburon. What about the contractors? What about people who commute there every day? I don't live in Mill Valley or Tiburon. I work there. There's many other people who do that too. So for example, leaf blowers, a lot of people have contractors who use their leaf blowers. And currently, like, our ordinances are written where that contractor would be fined the X amount of hundreds of dollars for using leaf blower. Is that an equitable enforcement method? We have to think about those things too.
Bob, you got a question?
Yeah, I have a question about MCE. I know MCE participates in MCEP, and I'm wondering about your interactions with them. Do they seek your advice? Do you ask them for anything, including money? What is the story on that? Some of the other consumer choice aggregators do provide some financial support for implementing local climate action plans. So what is MCE doing?
That's a good question. So we, as a county, have a representative from MCE who's our person, our ally, Sebastian Kahn. He's great. And you were saying, do they come to us or do we go to them? It's a bit of both, but they kind of exist to serve the county and the counties that they serve, which is like Napa, Contra Costa, and Sonoma, and Marin. And so when I have a question, I go to Sebastian mostly. I mean, Sebastian can come to us with like, what do you need? And so we'll, that's kind of more the relationship. You had a question on funding. They do have funding for different climate action implementation programs. They are supporting Fairfax and San Anselmo's EV show. And they'll pitch into a couple of other things. They'll have
EV charging.
EV charging kind of incentives. Grace or Phoebe, are there any other kind of additions to that relationship?
Yeah, I believe they also partially fund the program to replace municipal hot water heaters with heat pumps. So they and PG&E, I believe, sort of co-sponsor that program. And then, yeah, the EV charging stations, we've gotten several rebates from them for the installation of public charging stations.
Okay, final question, David, goes to you. And we are out of time. So David, in a brief question. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill, for calling over there. First of all, thanks so much for the three speakers for being here today. This is a great presentation, and I feel like I hope I'm getting a little snapshot of what MCEP looks like, what your meetings look like. Since you're representing the three of you, 5 of the 12 jurisdictions, that's a pretty good cross section of the jurisdictions. And I personally have very, very high regard for MCEP, but I don't know what goes on there because it's not open to the public. So I hope what we're seeing, that the good relationships and collaboration among the three of you is representative of that. But there are two things, and maybe this will be more of a comment than a question, really. But one of you commented, or two of you, I think, commented on development of annual work plans. And it seems to me that one of the areas that could really, that's an important concept to share with all the jurisdictions, not just the ones that are represented here today, and especially how to translate those work plans into budget line items that have the word climate or sustainability in them, rather than they just blend into all the staff level. Because it goes back to that metrics things, it's that visibility. So I'm wondering what you guys are thinking around that, about how to get from work planning to actual budget line items. And then the second thing is, I think there's a gap around not just evaluating progress on implementation of caps in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, but actually having status reports that are easily presentable and readable by council members, the elected officials. So I'd like to encourage you to think about that. Maybe you're already working on it, but some sort of easy, not just a summary of greenhouse gas reductions achieved, but how are we doing on implementing those 140 or however many actions there are in the climate action plans, that a council member can easily see these are on track, these are not on track, and be sure to include the ones not on track, because that's really more important than going over what is on track. So just a couple of thoughts there. If you have any thoughts about that, but I hope all that's going on at MCEP.
Yeah, and I can chime in, and I thank you, Dave, for those comments, and, you kind of hit on the two big parts of our work plan, I think, that we really try to focus on making climate action measures in our cap a line item in the budget. And that can be difficult to do because some of these things we actually don't know how much they're gonna cost until the very end. And so having the, a budget amount allocated can be a hard conversation to have because we don't know what that would look like. It can be more than what people would like to put down. But I think especially as we get closer to that 2030 kind of big day, it's becoming more and more relevant that these are bigger projects we're gonna have to do. And they're gonna cost either time or money. And I think that time part is too, the amount of staff labor that it's gonna take to do these initiatives is also part of like that budget process that we need to be aware of. And the cap does do a little bit of that outlining as well. And I appreciate your comment on the implementation record of tracking and making it accessible. That's something that I struggle with that a lot too, because it's a lot, like you said, it's like 140 measures. So how do we talk about it in a very concise and accessible way that's not fire hosing information, and also saying what's on track, what's not, without it being information overload of here's the 18,000 things that we've been doing and what's working, what's not. How do we make it like a 3-page document that's like red, yellow, green? So I appreciate those comments. And this is, yeah, for MCEP, it's very much like this. We have a lot of very technical conversations on how we can work with each other, what's available. We talk about funding opportunities, and then we'll also occasionally get presentations from other agencies or other cities about the work that they're doing, so we can all kind of learn from each other. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we want to be respectful of your time as far as, getting back to your day, the rest of your day job. Is there, if people want to reach out to you, how do they do that?
Email or phone?
Okay, and can you?
You can leave.
Google?
Yeah, you're welcome to share our contact.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got, we'll put those into the chat
Mm-hmm.
and do that before the end of the show. But thanks so very much for coming in. It's great to have you. We may try if there's later in the year, if there's interest in having Dana Armanino and
Corey.
Corey and
Corey.
Gretchen.
And Gretchen.
Yeah,
And we're missing one other, anyway, the missing four will be here, we hope.
yeah,
Yeah.
so, all right. Thanks so much, and you're welcome to stay for the second half of the program if you'd like, but,
Should be interesting.
yeah.
Thank you.
So. Shifting gears here. So a month ago, when we agendized the second half of this meeting, what we were thinking about was that we want to have a positive discussion about what people can do on a local, regional, and state level to continue addressing climate change in the context of what's been going on in Washington. That was around Inauguration Day that we started figuring that out. And of course, we've all had just an onslaught of things since then. And don't really want to spend much time today talking about what's going on there because it changes every day. Other than the fact a whole lot of very good people have been terminated. And we're going to see a lot of things not happen that don't happen just because we don't have the people anymore to do them, in addition to programs that are going to go away. But so I think what we wanted to talk about really is, so what can people be doing? And I'm going to put up on the screen sort of 4 questions that can kind of be the focus of people's thoughts and comments about about what can be done here today, or what we can be doing. What actions relating to climate are you focusing on over the next 3 to 4 months? What actions are you planning on focusing on over the next 2 years? Whether there are particular local, regional, or state organizations or boards that you intend to follow closely and or submit comments to over the next 2 years. And what actions or educational efforts should COG focus on over the next 12 months to help to move things forward. I was just going to say, just kind of kick things off. So from my perspective, I have engaged with a bunch of other alternate media in order to make sure I'm getting a broader perspective on things, both environmental and non-environmental. I'm focused on a couple of 2 or 3 agencies. We've been focusing and covering MCE very closely for years. We're going to continue to do that. The Bay Area Regional Water, Bay Air Quality Regional Management District is got their process for hot water, heat pump, hot water heaters coming out over the next few months. And I'm going to be following that very closely along with CARB's efforts on cap and trade. So I just kind of picked a few things that I'm going to spend my time doing. Jody, I asked you to kind of give some thought to what you're doing and what 350 is doing that might kind of fit within this context.
Yeah, well, cut me off if I go too far or too long. I'm gonna try to make it concise, but really, in the spirit of solidarity, I think many of us wear many hats. We work with a lot of different organizations. So on a very personal level for me, I've been drawing on my cultural anthropology fieldwork skills and listening and reading a ton more, as you are. Also checking in with a lot of organizations and nonprofits that I don't typically track a lot of, like Indivisible Marin, Indivisible Sonoma, Indivisible across the nation is really organizing. So I've wanted to see what they're up to. And of course, they're encouraging lots of phone calls and lots of emails and really pushing on that front. And then also, of course, showing up for protests with 5051, that organization's doing a lot of that. So I've been on Zoom and webinars, Extinction Rebellion and Elders Action Network, studying Masha Gessen's work, Haymarket books, The Corporate Coup. There was a great webinar the other day with Naomi Klein and a bunch of folks that was really very inspiring. And the conversation out there is not only what can we do and what can we do individually and collectively, but also what's our vision? what's our sort of project 2025? Had we won a trifecta ourselves as quote Democrats, what's our plan? What's our vision? And trying to get folks to get more concrete about that. Is it reasonable to put together a platform of some kind? Across groups and across the left or progressives or liberals, however you want to frame it, or whatever group you want to work on. So personally, I've been just like doing a lot more deep diving, as I think many of us are, trying to understand what's going on and figure out how to be the most creative and forward thinking about what we do. By way of 350 Marin, I'll just say, we're a small group, but we had an annual retreat about 2 weeks ago. And I think one of the main things, one of the things that we started with and focusing a bit on are self-care issues. Like, how do you manage the mental health issues that we're all feeling, the emotional responses to what's going on, keeping workloads that are really manageable so that we don't get burnt out, because that's really important to be able to keep our energy together, and then connecting with family, friends, neighbors, groups, really having that kind of support, because there's a lot of us doing a lot of different things, and to the degree that we can collaborate more and more is really important. We also, 350 Marin, of our campaigns, the two that we're going to be focusing more on over the next 6 months. I don't know about 2 years out. I think things are changing way too much for us to be thinking too far that way, but we're focusing on our internships. We have high school students right now who are working with Al and Julia on electrification rate reform. And then also we've just started our interviews for our college interns for this summer so that we can get folks on board there. So engaging with youth, one of our members is following a lot of podcasts that are being written and done by youth to see what are they talking about and how are they thinking about these issues. And then in addition to that, our internship program really starting to focus more on our campaign advocating for climate leadership, which we got started a bit on this last year. 350 Bay Area and ourselves have 501c4s. So really looking at the 2-year electoral process, trying to find folks in the community who we think should run, those who then file, supporting those who are climate champions and evaluating folks for endorsements. And then supporting folks once they're in. I mean, that was one question I didn't hear too much conversation about, and I know it's a tricky one, but all of us have councils, right? And as climate action commissioners or committee members, we're tracking on that and wondering where the leadership is. And for some of our towns, it's moved more to the conservative side. For others, it's moved a bit more to the other side, which is great. But really how we interact with our councils and how we know, I mean, as a climate action, as a chair of the Fairfax, we really are supposed to advise the council on, from our point of view, with our staff. So tracking on the new people who maybe got elected and what we can do with them is really important. So 350 Marin is really wanting to work on that process and engage volunteers, ourselves and others, to try to get the best people we can in office so that we can work on that. We also, of course, support a lot of the actions and events that are happening. We did have Damon Connolly come to Fairfax on behalf of Fairfax and San Anselmo's climate action committees and talk with 6 students, high school students. That was a great dialogue and a lot of fun. And to get them engaged together. We have an electrification fair that we're putting together on March 30th, a little kind of mini fair in the Women's Club, as is Novato, planning one at the end of May. So trying to get events out there that the public can engage with other community members who've done some electrification things. So especially our 350's campaign on electrifying everything is supporting some of the actions, not just of the climate action committees, but of all the other nonprofits, because a lot of us are doing what we can. And I guess I just finished by saying 350, we typically or like to get out on the street sometimes. There hasn't been a lot of support for that in general until now, and that's sort of flooding back in. So that's exciting. There was quite a turnout at the San Rafael City Hall the other day, from what I hear. There's also a protest coming up that Latinos United in Marin is doing on March 1st at 11 o'clock in the canal on immigration and ICE raids. So rather than do protests or rallies or marches ourselves, we're trying to educate people on what's out there if you want to engage and you want to get out there and burn a little energy and be with other like-minded folks and let the community know this is what we care about. There's always that aspect
Okay.
too.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah.
Bill Carney?
Yeah, thanks. I look forward to discussion here with everyone. So my frame, I think, is kind of jurisdictional. I think what's happening in Washington right now, we need to pay a lot of attention to. I think the first big response to it needs to be local, right? We need to, okay, not going to get a lot of support there. Things are on hold. What can we do locally? So that's sort of one big frame that I see all this in. I also see it in terms of the state of California being our bastion of climate progress, both for us in state, but also as an example for the world. So I think we need to do everything we can to bolster the success of the state's efforts over the next 4 years. But not to lose sight of national. And I think what's happening nationally makes it also global, as we're seeing in lots of different fields, but in climate in particular, that, with things going as far afield from American values as they are right now, that's having a global effect. And certainly in climate, it's having a global effect. I think so. I think we need to keep that perspective in mind as to the importance of what we're dealing with. And I think the basic response to that, from my mind, is tenacity, right? Yeah, this is really bad, but we've got to be tenacious in pursuing the work that we've all been engaged in for so long. I do think another kind of super frame for all of that the election in particular brought about, and a lot of the responses now to the post-election disaster is a frame of messaging. I think we've been at this a long time, and we're still not connecting with enough people about the dire dimensions of the crisis that we're facing, and on a more positive side about, hey, we got solutions. We don't have to go in the direction that we're going in right now. We have ways of solving this that are good for equity, that are good for economics, as well as being good for the planet all around. So those are kind of framing things. I think on the first couple of questions that Ken raised here, what do we do locally? And I think, again, going back to the metrics, focusing on what's important that we have some agency over or with, and that would be, we've got electrification of buildings. We've got a roadmap for that. Let's keep at it. Let's make it as successful as possible here in Marin. Likewise with the EV strategy plan that's in place. And I would add to that also a third element of greenhouse gases emissions that we have some control over, which is methane emissions from our landfills. SB 1383 was mentioned. Got to make sure that is successfully implemented and enforced, and that the waste the compost gets out there into the land where it's going to do some sequestration good as well. And Bell sitting next to me here, the biomass project is about to release its study in the next couple of months. It provides somewhat of a roadmap of recommendations in that direction as well. So emission reduction, a big thing that we can pay attention to. In terms of preparedness for climate impacts, we've seen wildfire has been addressed with a lot of resources countywide. The next big one coming along is sea level rise. So I think that I see that being getting attention, at least from me and my organizations over the next 4 years, really, and really keeping an eye on that. And then a holder of all of this for me is something that we've began working on at Marin Can, countywide, public-private partnership to get to zero get to net zero emissions by 2045. So we're started to work on the concept of a countywide ballot measure that would bring in some resources, some major resources, in order to support all those things that I just mentioned, and more, but basically to support the good work that's already going on and which could reach these goals if it gets more resources applied to it. So not happening federally. State is in a pinch too, as are towns and cities, but I think we at least should put it before the people as to would they be supportive of such an effort. And then the question related to organizations and boards, et cetera, and to what COG might focus on. I think again, MCL is well positioned to address kind of what's going on in the state and keep tabs on that. I think that could be something that COG continues to do and maybe enhances this year. I think the good work with MCE needs to go on, because that is, that's a major climate accomplishment systemically from what, 10 going on 15 years ago now. But they have resources, by the way. They collect utility bills. And so how those resources, now that they're have their reserve fund totally in place, that's a big question. So that I think the MCL has a real role in that, and COG does. I think I think maybe also something that we could pay a bit more attention to is what's going on nationally, and specifically, I think Jody mentioned this too. Congress, we got a 2-year time frame here to midterms, and that could make all the difference. If we can get through these 2 years and we get a new Congress in there, we can restore some of the stuff that's being dismantled at the moment. So I think that's something we could keep that conversation going around this table and bring in the expertise, whether it's Jared Huffman or others. And then the final thing I would say is that also maybe we can pay more attention to that greater global and national context in which all of our work takes place, so that we're well aware of what's going on and incorporate it into what we do here locally.
Okay, Bob, and then Fabrice.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what Marine Conservation League is planning on. I'll cover a little bit of what Ken raised. So we really have 3 focuses of our advocacy at this point. One is how MCE is spending very large excess surpluses. Local jurisdictions is another area that we're focusing on, and you folks here, but also state level action. And so we've been spending a good deal of time looking at MCE surpluses. They're in the tens of millions of dollars per year. They're in excess of they're meeting very large financial requirements. In MCE's case, they have over $500 million set aside for their financial meeting those requirements. And what we want, so these tens of millions of dollars per year, we want MCE to spend them on innovative energy projects. Could be a bunch of different things, including aggregated distributed energy resources. We wanted to spend it on more purchases of clean energy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, more community energy programs, which would affect you folks, because for other consumer choice aggregators, it's been a lot more on solar plus batteries and building electrification for government buildings and not-for-profits. And we want more money for local jurisdictions, and we want rebates to people who need it the most. So an MCE at this point, it seems to be intent on spending their excess cash on fixed assets. And there are more immediate concerns that could be addressed with their cash. And I'll say this, that while they point to some big grants they've gotten, given what's happening in Washington, additionality really matters. So bringing more money to the table to reduce greenhouse gas emissions matters more now than ever before. And they can do that. So we've been talking to staff and board members to try to direct funds where they should go. And, local jurisdictions, we've been active in building electrification work, is supportive of the EV electrification plan. We'll probably be doing more with Transportation Authority of Marin, because we feel that they need to focus more on reducing greenhouse gases as an objective. And partly it's happenstance, but partly because of what has happened in Washington, we are focusing more on state level activity. We've sat in on 2 meetings in the last 2 months with Damon Connolly, including on electric rate reform. We have another policy development group that meets regularly, that does deep dives into issues. And anybody is interested, contact me. But that group has gone through what potential positive legislation Dan Connolly could introduce. And so we're working on that and developing some specific proposals for him. Again, the state becomes even more important. And then what I think we want to see are a couple of things I'd like to see for COP. Talk for myself. One is more programs on innovations in clean energy. Things that are quite promising and are likely to scale going forward. We need some visibility into what those things are. Aggregated and distributed energy resources, enhanced geothermal, long duration energy storage are some examples. And we'll continue to want to focus on MCU's large surpluses and spend them, and again, on state level policy.
Good. Fabrice. And then Wendy, and next after that.
Wait.
Well, thank you.
You gotta mute yourself on your computer.
Hold on, let me mute. So you'll be able to hear even if I'm not on.
Yeah.
Got it. Great. Sorry about that. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Bob. And thank you, everyone, for inviting me to present what we're working on at Green Change this year. Very much along the lines of what everybody said before, so I'm not going to repeat this, but this year Green Change is going to try to work with more activists and governments at the local level, while still, helping to participate in the larger political undertakings. And there, as you know, in the past, Green Change has organized large climate events like Earth Day Marin that brought in, over 1,000 people, and were really aimed at the general public and tended to focus on individual action. This year, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're still going to have a celebration on Earth Day, and I'm going to tell you about it, but it's going to be focused on climate advocate and on collective actions that we can all rally behind this year, so we can unify around these climate actions. So I'm going to share a couple slides to show you what we're hoping to accomplish, and we hope that you will be part of that. Find my slides, which are here, and tell you a little bit about Earth Day Changemakers. It's scheduled for Wednesday, April 23rd, 2025 at the wonderful Mill Valley Community Center. And we hope to serve a large community of people like you, climate champions that make it all happen. So we can, powwow with each other and focus on what we can all do together. We already serve thousands of people out in the general public, but this time it's intended as a networking event for climate advocates and activists. Some of the people who have already told us they will participate include several dozen organizations. And I'm delighted that we already got such a strong response before we even started promoting it in earnest. We hope that many of your organizations, both here in this room and out in the Zoom room, will take the time to sign up as well and join us for what promises to be a very exciting event. The program is 3 hours. It's a Wednesday afternoon from 2 to 5. We will have some short talks by 3 climate action leaders, just about 10 minutes or so, just to present a vision of what we can accomplish together. Most of the rest of the time is going to be devoted to networking and informally catching up with each other. And we also have a couple structured features. One is we'll have action tables all around the room focusing on collective action on a variety of themes. And then we will have action workshops, which will be short roundtable discussions about key campaigns that we can all rally behind. And many of you are invited in helping co-host the action tables or action workshops if you are interested. So it's going to be fewer talks, more networking, and a few short workshops. The main themes are the ones we've been talking about today: transportation, energy, electrification, buildings, efficiency, food and land use, waste, plastic, wildfire, and emergencies. But there are 2 categories which are a little bit new. One is political action, which of course is super important. It should be a top priority for all of us, at least individually, I would hope, if not as part of our organizations. And community engagement was the most popular request for a topic to discuss. How do we engage the public better? And how do we network better with each other? So those are actually the most popular issues that are at the bottom of the screen that really should be at the top. Let's see. So we talked about the action tables, now action workshops. So they're conceived as short action workshops co-hosted by 1 or more climate leaders. So it doesn't have to be one organization hosting it. It could be 2 organizations coming together to host a workshop. Focus on collective action, not individual action. About 10 to 15 minutes, and we've already discussed some of the topics. Here are some of the first workshops that people have proposed and that we're discussing with them. And Al Grummett in particular, who's on the Zoom call, is working actively with many of these folks, as well as I am. One is Jody talked to us about, her program. I thought I had updated that slide. Sorry about that. For advocating for leadership, running for local office, but we'll refine the title together. That was music to our ears when you proposed that. The other one is David Moeller has proposed a workshop on how to drive building electrification. And he's going to be working with Al Grummett to try to refine that broad topic into actionable collective action. Al himself is going to partner with some of you to reduce California electric rates and figure out how we do that. We have a proposal in development with Plastic Free Marin and Susan Hopp to develop a countywide BYO campaign, just like you did with the food ordinance a while back. And then I will host a workshop on building an online hub for local climate action. We already have a Green Change Google group that many of you are part of. If you're not part of it yet, please let me know. I'll add you to it. So we could potentially expand that group, or we could just create another online hub if needed to make sure that we're in close touch to each other at wide scale. The schedule is we hope to have about 10 to 15 minutes for each workshop. So it's a short 2-minute presentation or so. Questions from the participants, and then hopefully a sign up section where you actually have a sheet where people can sign up to join your campaign or coalition. And we'll probably do up to 10 workshops, no more than that, so that everybody has a chance to attend those. And those will be in between the talks. And the speakers, we're still working on it. If you have any recommendations, let us know. We have a few people who have already agreed to participate. Bill McKibben is going to participate by video. And we'll probably have a couple others. But we're not asking for a lot of people to pitch themselves to be a speaker. We would rather that you hosted a workshop. We think it's a better way to network. I'm going to skip the event schedule, and I'm going to go to the final slide showing you this is the Mill Valley Community Center. For those who haven't seen it, this year we're in that room here on the right, and this is what it looks like. It's a lovely room where it'll be very comfortable for about 100 people, 200 people or so. We hope that we get that many, and we hope many of you will join us. If you'd like to learn more, click on earthdaymarin.net, and we'll put the link in the chat. And if you want to sign up, please do RSVP at the second link below. We'll ask you a few short questions about how you'd like to participate, and it's super helpful for us to finalize the event plan. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Wendy?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not gonna, like everybody else, I'm not gonna repeat what other people had to say. I do want to add some things to it. Bill talked about a number of things. One of the other things that Sustainable San Rafael is doing is we're having quarterly meetings with the Canal Alliance to talk about collaboration, what their needs are, and how we can help them and how they can help us. Of course, the canal is one of the places where sea level rise is probably at the most dangerous. And so that's something that we're focusing on. And also part of a group called Solidarity Sundays, which is a group of people who've been doing letter writing and postcarding and things like that. We're starting to get into street actions. We were out at the hub on Wednesday, last Monday, we were at the hub waving signs. Next Sunday, I think we're going to be at the Tesla dealership. And then finally, and probably most important to me, and I've mentioned this before, is what's going on with public transit. There has been a long-term discussion at MTC, I'm on the Policy Advisory Council, of doing a regional transit measure to, originally it was to improve public transit, now it's just to catch up. And unfortunately, the North Bay is probably not going to be part of that. They've pretty much been cut out, and it's just going to be focusing on the BART counties. So we've been having some meetings just in the North Bay and talking to SMART about the SMART reauthorization and what we can do to try to expand that beyond just being about SMART. One of the things when SMART was first introduced, there was a lot of promises made. It was going to go all the way from Larkspur to Cloverdale. It was going to have a bike path right next to it. And there was going to be connecting bus services to take care of the first and last mile. Well, as many people know, the bike path had to fight really hard to get it back on the agenda. And Cloverdale is still, they're still committed to Cloverdale, despite the fact that there's not a big need to get to Cloverdale. And what's not on the table is those connections of the first and last mile to serve the rest of the county. And so that's our focus, is to convince SMART to include that in their reauthorization. We're going to be talking with the transit agencies, talking with SMART, and we could use a lot of support, you know, depending on where we land as we gather our information and talk to the appropriate people, to really convince them that, you know, if they want to really get the support of people in Marin and Sonoma County, we need to serve not just the people along the 101 corridor, but the entire counties as far as transit is concerned. So we're hoping we can get support from a lot of these other organizations. And in that vein, there is going to be a forum on March 28th that's unfortunately going to be in Napa. They could not get a venue that was in the central county. So it's going to be in Napa, but it's going to be the intersection of transportation, climate, and health. And I'll have more information on that, and I can get that out to the group as it comes closer. It's actually getting pretty close because it's next month. But I've got some flyers and some information, and as soon as I get we get the name of the venue on there, I will get that out. And if you could tell me who to send it to so it can go out to the whole group, that would be really helpful.
Wendy, send it to either to myself or to Bob Miller.
Okay, do I have your emails?
I'm sure you do.
We'll get them to you.
Yeah, we'll get them to you.
Okay.
Thanks, Wendy. Okay. Bell?
Yeah. Okay. I guess that, I think my highest priority right now, as we face every day, every minute, grotesque, horrible actions taken in Washington. And, so I think we need not just to say they're happening and then move on to do local things. I think we need to understand what they are. And I think our community needs to understand what they are. Because in that way, we'll get them involved in a way that otherwise we may have trouble. Because I don't think this country has seen anything quite like this. And it is 100% scary at every level. So, and also, not only what's happening nationally with the agencies and the commissions and the people, but also internationally. I mean, I saw this morning in the paper, I just want to mention, extreme unrest are forcing climate programs to shutter. This is around the world. It's, you can't believe it, but it's true, it's happening. I just think we need a way of making sure that our group, our population, people here know what's happening. And I have some ideas about doing that, not too many, but I think it's important. And the other is that we should see what the state is doing, and this has been mentioned by others too. We need to keep a handle on what's happening in the governor's office, which is secretary of different agencies, but I'm thinking of resource management. And that's related to what Jared Huffman is doing at the federal level in the same area. Take full advantage of their positions and utilize it to fight back. So I think we need some kind of strategy for the state. And it's not for us to develop it, but I think we should be looking for it. I think it's going to happen, and it is happening. And then we have our strategy for the county. And I think the strategy for the county is what everybody's talking about, but in a way to engage the board of supervisors, engage people who will somehow make a difference at levels that perhaps we can't. And then I think what you're talking about is, it's just great. And I think we should engage in that. And I think we should do something that we've all been talking about, which is to demonstrate how impressive our experience has been over the last, 10 years. Can we say 10 years, maybe? It's longer than that, but let's show not only the county, but show everybody what we've done in Marin. And it is really impressive. And I don't think just a bunch of tables with things on it. I think we need a way of getting it across that we're going to do it. And that's one of the things I like about, say, a new bond issue or something on climate, is that if the feds aren't going to fund it, if the feds aren't going to do it, we're going to do it. We'll do it ourselves. That's where
Well
I am.
said.
Okay. One other thing that I have been thinking about, and sort of in the context of keeping track of what's going on, I think it's important with a number of the terminations that have been going on,
Yeah.
to figure out a way to educate the public on that. I mean, when I'd like to see some written voices or some letters to the editor, of what you're describing, that, for example, this biologist in Point Reyes has been terminated, who is responsible for tracking salmon, or I don't know the specifics at this point.
Right.
Or these 4 folks who are in charge with reducing fuel loads in in the local national forests have all been terminated, and that's going to mean they can't do prescribed burns or a fuel break or some things like that. So I've thought about that in terms of trying to develop, as we learn more about what's happened with that, how we get that information out to the public so they can see more clearly what the impacts of these are, other than just some reductions in the costs of the federal government.
But it also is going to require collaboration among the different groups.
Yeah. Dale McClure, briefly.
Who's this?
Dale McClure.
Dale.
There we
Go ahead.
go. Well, briefly, what actions relating to climate are you focusing on over the next 3 or 4 months? Concerning the disinformation that's been effective coming out of the federal government. I know there's a lot of superb work being done to protect and restore our home, planet Earth. However, another year has gone by and I see the continuing devastation of our planet Earth refusing to go away. I'm Dale McClure, a lifelong resident of Marin County and the proponent of the Sustainable Healthy Earth Act, or SHAE. The Sustainable Healthy Earth Act is a proposed statewide ballot initiative that aims to require by 2026, 30 hours of Earth sustainability education and best practices training for public school students every 2 years without additional financial burdens on schools. This petition will go live at the end of next month and we'll start collecting signatures. And this may be a little audacious. However, studies show that education on climate change can reduce each student's carbon footprint by at least 2.5 tons annually. In Marin County, that is a potential emissions reduction of 75,000 tons of CO2 annually, which is about the same total amount of reductions from all other sectors being tracked by the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership. That means doubling the amount of emissions reduction in Marin County. This initiative will be on the 2026 ballot. We are qualifying SHAE for statewide vote and we will win. We need 1.2 million signatures to qualify. You, me, everybody in this room, each of us must collect at least 30 signatures, and we don't stop there. We get 3 friends to do the same. If that chain continues for just 10 rounds, we reach over 2 million signatures. This is a self-funding campaign. Every person downloads the petition, prints it, and collects signatures. Costs less than $10 per person to make an impact. And for those who recognize that SHAE isn't just an initiative, but the solution, we welcome strategic funders ready to push this forward.
Thank you, Dale. David?
I'll make this really quick, Ken. I just want to draw your attention to an item I put in the chat. There's a draft state bill sponsored or co-authored by Speaker Rivas, so it's got some horsepower behind it. It's called AB 306. And what it would do is freeze all state and local building standards, building codes, energy codes, beginning June 1st this year, 25, and freeze them to June 1st, 31. So it would wipe out all future progress on energy efficiency improvements, building electrification, and so on coming through building standards, including at the local level. So I've included a short note that I'm sending to Assemblyman Connolly, and I'd like to encourage you all to take a quick look at this, what I wrote up, and reach out to Assemblyman Connolly or other influencers that you can to try and get the wording changed. Since it's sponsored by the Speaker of the Assembly, it'll probably be hard to kill it, but maybe we can get it modified in a good way. This seems to be flying under the radar, because it has a good laudable goal behind it to encourage more housing. But it has this flaw that it would also freeze all future progress, much of what we're talking about at the local and state level, coming through any energy code. So please take a look at that. The deadline to introduce new legislation, some of you know this better, way better than I do, I believe, is February 21, so just 2 days. So this requires some immediate action. So please take a look at that and take some action. Thank you.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. First of all, Bob, you want to announce for us what the COG meeting next month is about? So we've got, because it's a little bit of a meaty one.
Yeah. Well, meetings are very interesting. We're gonna have speakers from Sunrun and Clean Coalition. We'll talk about quote unquote virtual power plants, aggregations of especially batteries and solar, and using them in a way that can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and lower costs and increase resilience. And so the Sunrun, we've already talked with the Sunrun representative and the Clean Coalition folks. There are lots of interesting issues. For Clean Coalition, what we'll be hearing are the multiple barriers that are out there to using like batteries and storage or controlling thermostats in a way that's very helpful to reducing greenhouse gas emissions because of regulations that are out there to protect the investor-owned utilities. And so it'll be sort of a fascinating discussion about how far can we go in getting creative use of these batteries, thermostats, EVs, and so on now, and what needs to change at the legislative level in order to go much further.
Good. Kate Powers?
Yeah, I just wanted to put a plug in for MCL's Land Use Transportation and Water Committee. We have a smart, both Bill Gamlin and Eddie Cummins, who's the general manager, coming to our Land Use Committee meeting on March 5th, Wednesday from 12 to noon. SMART has been
10 to 12.
I'm sorry, 10 to 12. What did I say? Anyway, 10 to 12 is correct. SMART has really been responsive to the bicycle community, but in terms of environmental questions, not so much. So they are changing, trying to use a less harmful fuel, and they're extending their range, both east-west and north-south. And some of the tracks are going through the marsh, and some of the work that they're doing is trying to coordinate better with bus service and ferry service in a more timely basis. But it would be great if some of the climate interests would come to that meeting. And it's an opportunity in a small setting to really question Eddie Cummins and let them know what our concerns and interests are. And before the tax goes back before the voters, we want to make an impression on them on what we want SMART to be thinking about in terms of securing an environmental vote. So that again is Wednesday 10 to noon on March 5th, and I encourage you all to go. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention is I really like some of the meetings that Humboldt 350 has been putting on, and they have a legislative committee, and they're tracking both Sierra Club's legislative analysis and CAC climate energy analysis. And I think that we could do, just like David mentioned, we could follow some of the proposed bills and have a voice early before they get too far and try to influence our local legislators on speaking out in a way that we would like them to. And that's it. Thanks.
Thanks. Sue Saunders?
Yeah, thanks. Just some quick announcements. We have 2 local chapters of Indivisible, and they are very involved in fighting the, illegal and unconstitutional actions by this administration. And being part of it has given me a lot of hope. Taking part in protests has given me a lot of hope. So that's kind of how I'm dealing with all of this. And so I put the links for Indivisible Marin and Indivisible Sonoma County that are really doing great things. They meet once a month, and it really makes me, like I said, feel better to be taking some kind of action. Indivisible Sonoma in particular has direct actions you can take that I have found to be really impactful, especially the 5 calls. And I put a link for that too. There's also an app you can do on your phone, and it's simply take 5 minutes, call your 3 representatives, and do it 5 days a week. And there's different messages. I put one in the chat, and Indivisible, the app will give you scripts for whatever concern you have or whatever subject. And lastly, I'm working with 3 Archie Williams teenagers to raise funds for a climate mural to cover the Memorial Park bathroom walls. These funds will go to the Arts Commission to hire an artist to create and then paint the mural. We are almost to our goal, but if we can get over that final line, any contributions you can make would be greatly appreciated. And I put that link in the chat as well. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bill?
One more thing. There is a bill I think we should be supporting, and that's Damon Conley's recent bill, 491. And it places the state's greenhouse gas reduction targets into law. And it's actually, it looks very favorable, and it gives us a shot at what others are trying to do to prevent that from happening.
I read the text and I'm not all that sure it does that, but
Well,
it's a little unclear.
Yeah.
But
we can have
we
more
can
discussion.
talk about that more later as we look into it. I'd like to hear what David's staff has to say about it.
Yeah, I have something too. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Great meeting. Let's keep working hard.
See you on March 19th at the next climate action working group meeting.